To understand the story Araby by James Joyce, it's useful to know something about the setting. And we know that in the story, the boy goes to a bazaar. Okay, so a bazaar, which is a sort of market, an Eastern market. Although in a Western context, a bazaar can also refer to any kind of market to raise funds for a particular cause. So a church might put on a bazaar, let's say. In this case, then, he goes to this bazaar called Araby, and it's really neat that we can pinpoint the actual event that the story refers to. So let's go through this flyer here. This is the flyer from the original event, and we'll talk a little bit about what makes this significant in relation to the story. If you look at the top here, you can see that the price is 1 shilling. That turns out to be for the adult entry. It also says in the text that there is a 6-penny entry or entrance. So here we go, 6-penny entrance. And that turns out to be for children. Okay, so it's quite significant that the boy ends up going through the 1 shilling entry because this is part of growing up and becoming an adult. He doesn't actually have enough time to kind of find the 6-penny entrance. The next word here in this wonderful big font is Araby, and this is an old literary sort of word for Arabia. If you think of Saudi Arabia, for instance, but you should think beyond a single country. Arabia is meant to represent the Middle East, the Far East, well, not the furthest East, but the Middle East for sure. And there's this sort of exotic literary quality to it. It sounds exciting without us being able to exactly know what part of the Middle East this would be. So it's a very stereotypical representation. We also have this word official. Okay, so official over here, that makes it sound very grand. And we know that it takes place in Dublin. There is a bit of tension here between these two things, and that's what the story exposes. Dublin is not the same as Araby, and the boy wants to escape from Dublin. He wants something exciting, but it turns out that he can't really get away from Dublin entirely. Then we have this next bit, which talks about a grand oriental fete. A fete or fete, this refers to a party, okay, a festival. There we go. It's a French word, which is interesting because elsewhere in the story it also talks about a particular cafe at the bazaar, the Café Chantant, which means the singing cafe. So fascinating then that we have this mixture of French and Oriental or Eastern culture. It seems as if anything far away is exotic to the boy. And the mixture of these things shows how artificial this bazaar is, that they're basically just mixing something French, something from the Middle East, and this is meant to somehow evoke all these wonderful feelings and sentiments. So the boy doesn't realize that this is a very artificial mixture of things, and it takes him a long time to really figure that out. The word Oriental, which we have over here, means Eastern. Okay, so Eastern. And the word originally comes from where the sun rises. So it's the place where the sun rises. And Oriental is the opposite of Occidental, although we don't use that word very much. So Occidental would be Western. The stereotype that we have here then is of the Orient, the East, and we see an Arab on a camel pointing with a gun. And at the very top here, you can see a minaret from a mosque. So this is all very stereotypical, right? It's not as if everybody rides camels in the Middle East. But every country, every place on earth has these types of stereotypes, and it's worth thinking about how valuable or not they are. For instance, I live in Canada, so people say about Canadians that we always say sorry, we always say a, and these things are true. We do apologize a lot. I think it's actually not a bad thing. We love hockey, apparently, although I don't personally play hockey. And we all say a boot instead of about, which has always intrigued me. I'm not sure if I say a boot instead of about, but I suppose you can disagree. Those are stereotypes And the point is that they might be funny, they might be interesting, sometimes they have a grain of truth, but reality, of course, is more complex. And that's what the story Araby is about as well. We tend to create these idealized, simplified versions of reality, and the story makes us think, well, there's more to reality than that, and we have to be realistic as well. Next on this poster or flyer, we see the date here, sort of 2/3 of the way down, May 14th to 19th, 1894. So this is quite a long time before the story is actually written, right? It's like, let me see here, a couple decades earlier. And it's on the last day of the bazaar that the boy goes, because he has to wait and wait and wait until his uncle gives him money, and then he barely gets there in time for the last hour or so. The last little bit here says, in aid of Jarvis Street Hospital, and this was a hospital. So you can see that there's a charitable cause here. This is for charity, which seems to be a good thing. But of course, in the story, charity as a concept is itself investigated and examined right from the start, where the priest who dies, there are questions about, well, how charitable was he? And should we look between the lines, read between the lines to kind of question his charity, or should we just take it at face value? So that's just one example of charity in the story. The irony here is that Jarvis Street Hospital no longer exists there, and instead we have a mall. So there's now a mall there, which is somewhat fitting in a sense with the story, because the story is ultimately about commercialism. There's a kind of crassness to commercialism, materialism, right? People just selling stuff for money. And all of this exotic veneer, the sort of covering here, the veneer, if we strip away the veneer, we see that underneath people are really out to make money. And this is just like any other market, ultimately. Takes the boy a long time to realize that, of course, and you can see why. If you've ever looked at an attractive flyer as a kid from IKEA, or I don't know, some other toy store that you like, you may have been entranced as well, because these things really sell themselves to us. And this flyer, I can see why the boy would have been intrigued by this flyer. Hopefully that helps you to understand then the basic setting of the story, and it makes it a lot easier to sympathize with the boy and see what's happening.